just want to introduce myself. My name is Mike. I'm here. I work at Arc. I'm the VP of Sales. I want to say thanks for taking the time to join us today for our webinar on 2023 hiring trends, how to find remote top tech talent. It's brought to you by Arc. What do? We connect great developers with companies all around the world. We're here in partnership with Deel, a global payroll solution that helps businesses hire anyone, anywhere. So if you'd love to learn more about us, we'll share the links in the comment box here at the beginning and also at the end. So getting started, we're going to discuss some actionable tips today on kind of how to strengthen your recruitment strategy, leveraging global remote hiring in the midst of what's been a challenging landscape for recruiting and really what you need to be successful. So to make sure we're helping you as best we can, get your answers out there, we're using our platform Code Mentor Live. There's a quick Q&A box there on the right-hand side that we'll be using to source any questions. We'll try and get to them as they come, but we might just wait until the end, depending on how the conversation goes. But feel free to drop any questions in to our guest speaker. Don't worry about any notes. We're going to send out the recording your way. And I think that's it on the admin side. So without further ado, let's welcome Bianca Sitzer, Global Strategic Partnership Manager at Deel. It's quite a title. So
it's pretty long.
Citing your impressive experience, love to just hear a little bit more about yourself. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody.
So you covered the title. Thank you, Mike. Yes, so that's my title. I do work for Deel. I've been here for a little over 2 years, and that's a great big deal at Deel because when I joined, we were around 100 people, and now we're at about 3,000 people. So that was pretty quick and very interesting ride. I am from Venezuela and lived in Israel a long time, and now I'm in New York. So if anyone's in New York and wants to learn more about Deel or about global talent and hiring, they can reach out.
All right, sounds good. Excellent. Well, very happy to have you. I guess today we'll start off. We're going to go kind of on a variety of topics here, but I guess we'll start off with understanding the challenges of remote hiring, really, and then kind of segueing that into understanding the benefits and challenges, really. So, Bianca, question for you. What benefits have you seen companies experience when they hire remote workers, and how do these benefits kind of differ from, say, traditional in-office hiring practices?
Yeah, so I think that we're seeing wide variety of benefits with hiring global talent. First of all, talent retention. We're seeing that talent is really asking to be flexible and to be global and to be able to work from home. Some companies are doing a hybrid model, some companies are doing a full remote model, but global hiring has definitely been in the increase. So one point that we see is very interesting is talent retention. The other one is cost efficiency, because talent is everywhere and the best talent is everywhere. And hiring the best developer in Brazil is going to be expensive if you're a company in Brazil, but it's going to be cheaper than hiring the best developer in San Francisco if you're a company looking at talent in San Francisco. So if you're looking at really averaging your cost and for a good people strategy that you can afford, then looking outside of your country, looking outside of the US or anywhere else where you would be based is very interesting as well for cost efficiency purposes. Then there's also the reason of in-market expertise, that you can expand quicker when you have on-the-ground experts. And it used to be that we thought, okay, so I have to establish an entity, I have to go and open a bank account, I have to go and figure out accounting and law and how many people I'm going to invest into this market. You had to really commit into a market to go there, but now it's no longer the case. You can really find the best person to expand in that market, test the market, and if it works for you, then eventually establish an entity there. So being able to land and expand quicker than we were able to before is another reason. And then, of course, there's DEI. So there is intrinsic diversity in hiring outside of your however many miles around you.
Definitely. That's you brought up a good point there. That's often one that's I think overlooked is kind of just the ramp time and setup of launching new markets or kind of new office hubs. Right? Is you don't have to secure the brick and mortar building. You don't have to get everybody's desk set up, get the IT situation
Hmm.
all set, Wi-Fi, everything like that. Everything just ramps up real quick with remote hiring. Right? You're ready to go day one. So I think that's something a lot of companies are really starting to realize, especially post pandemic, is the remote space is really taking off. So yeah, thank you for that. Um, I guess next question, right? Like, what do you think, in your experience at least, right? What are some of the key challenges companies kind of face right now when they're managing remote workers, right? How can they
Yeah.
overcome some of these challenges?
So that's a really, really great question, Mike, because management style has to be entirely different. I think we're seeing a focus from um, trying to manage and control people's working styles
Mhm.
into really focusing on output and being able to let people do what you hired them to do. And of course, in able to do that, in order to be able to manage a global team, you need to be very confident in who you're hiring, which is why Arc is amazing and why people should rely on companies like Arc, where you can really be sure that the person that you're onboarding is someone that you can trust to do the job right. Because then you can really just trust them to focus on output as opposed to, hey, were you at the office from 9 to 5? Because otherwise, it's not working. So that's definitely a challenge, making that switch. Also, figuring out setup is also a challenge. So you mentioned before setting up brick and mortar and like anything that you need to give them and the cost of that, but there's also the logistics of that. And we did have to do a shift. So we now partnered with a different company to be able to send out equipment to these people around the world. So really trying to find solutions for what a distributed team looks like.
Mhm.
And I would say another one would be, how do you engage teams and
Yeah.
how do you communicate and how do you create connection with teams that are global? And for that, we also have tools which are tech enabled. We have our own, but I'm sure there are more out there in the market. Ours is Engage.
Mhm.
Essentially, it helps you navigate anything from PTO to org charts to referrals to cooler encounters. So like you have like cooler meetings that you're set up with. So really just trying to foster communication. And I think a really big switch is over communicate. Like everyone needs to be super transparent, over communicating as transparent as possible so that we know what's happening in the company. I think those are the biggest challenges. What have you seen at ARC? Because you guys are global too.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, right, with the over communication piece. That's definitely been something that we really try and focus on, leveraging, channels where everybody's involved to be fully transparent. If you're doing kind of direct messages with two or three people, a lot of action items get lost, right? So we try and use platforms that's visible to everybody to kind of create that 360 view of communication. Tools like that, like you said, right? Collaboration, anything like Notion, Slack, Deal Engage,
Hmm.
um, anything for specific location or remote collaboration, but also on the fun aspect, right? I think it's very easy, and this comes up a lot with HR and recruitment teams. Is well, how do we, make sure that people like working here, right? How to make sure that they get along with their coworkers and building around that kind of special culture, or finding ways to do that, whether it's playing games via Zoom, checking in with people, having kind of some core office hours where people you can kind of connect with. I think that's all helpful in terms of keeping everybody engaged.
Yeah, yeah. So we're seeing really similar things there. I'm happy to hear that we're aligned.
Excellent. Well, talking about that, I mean, how do you think this like remote hiring kind of affects team collaboration? Like, what are some strategies to, I guess, mitigate some of these communication barriers?
Yeah, so I think it falls back to HR tech solutions. So
Mhm.
Slack is a big one. Notion is a big one. Engage for us is a huge one. So being able to, for example, I'll give you an example because we use all of our tools. So it's fun for me to tell you what our experience is. So if I take PTO, I go on Slack, I register my PTO, my manager gets a Slack that says, "Hey, Bianca just registered PTO, approve or deny." And
Right.
then if they have a question, they'll just come to me and say, "What's up?" And if not, they'll just approve it. Then from that, the question is when I leave, and this is the fun part, how do you inform a 3,000 people company who they're supposed to talk to if there's no one at the office? It used to be you go to an office, you knock on the door, hey, she's not here. The person in
Yeah,
the desk next to her can say, I'll take it or I'll give it to her boss. We don't have that anymore. So
right.
now if I'm away for PTO, you'll get a message that says who's in charge of my work while I'm away and who my manager is so that you can speak to them. So it's really easy to navigate. So there are these tools, and HR is evolving into being able to deal with all of these challenges.
No, I like that a lot. I mean, we have the same system in place, right, with the vacation request. And then we do that. We have coverage plans that we roll out, and people will, obviously put that up on any sort of external communications, kind of similar to what we did back in the office days. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's interesting to see how automation tools can definitely help with that, right? So, um, I guess moving on, I want to talk a little bit, shift gears here. We talked about engagement, right? But how about sourcing and attracting global remote tech talent, right? It's like, what are some practical ways for companies to build relationships with potential remote hires in different time zones, different cultures? I mean, you mentioned, right, you've been kind of all over from Venezuela to Israel to New York. What was your
Yeah.
experience? And then hiring here, like, how have you guys Deal gone about that? What's been your strategy?
Well, I feel like I can flip this question to you, to be honest, because you are the sourcing talent expert. So I will flip it to you. But what I can say on our side is you have to work with the right recruiters. Initially, when we were starting off, we there's also a component of who do you know that you can refer. So we work a lot with internal referrals, but you get to a point where that's not enough, and you really need to expand. And then working with the right recruiters that are going to align with your company values and your strategy is super important. Another thing that I would say is super important is you need to really focus on the soft skills when you're hiring. You need to
Mhm.
hire people that align with your values and not just with capabilities, because at the end of the day, you want to enjoy where you work and you want to
Right.
feel like everyone just like flows with each other. So I think what we've seen is soft skills is very important. And then I would also say that employer brand is very important because when we started creating a brand, we started attracting people that are like us. So I
Right.
would say that. But what are you seeing from your side? Is brand important? How important is it? Do you put a strong emphasis on hard skills versus soft skills? How does it work, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the regarding the soft skills versus hard, I mean, for us, we kind of have a mix, right? We really do value soft skills because I think specifically when it comes to remote work, right? Those are very important, right? You have to evaluate for things like work ethic and hustle mentality and things that are a little bit harder to evaluate just via Zoom calls. So we've kind of figured out ways to kind of systematize that, ask the right questions, give the right tasks to kind of evaluate that. In terms of brand, I mean, that's become more important than ever, right? So I think, especially as the world goes remote, the competition for top talent is always going to be there, whether you're local or remote. So one of the things we do on our Arc platform is we actually have the company profile feature where companies can highlight not only what their company's doing, what their values are, what their mission statement, but really why is this an exciting opportunity? What type of work are they going to be doing, right? How to attract that brand, leveraging their employees as their ambassadors. This strategy is actually very I guess successful in building a remote hiring platform, right? In addition to using platforms like what we have, leveraging your employees to really act as those ambassadors, putting a strong referral program in place because they're going to be connected to others in remote communities, right? Getting
Mhm.
involved, using events as part of your acquisition strategy is huge, right? Because that can kind of also let you bring in your employees, do kind of virtual networking events, but also have a presence to show off your talent brand. So I think there's a number of ways that companies can go about that for sure.
Love that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Taking note of that too.
Yeah, right? There's some good
Yeah.
stuff here. So,
Yeah.
uh, all right. Well, tell me, can you provide like examples of like job postings or maybe recruiting messages that have successfully attracted remote global talent?
I think that for those, the brand, like I would just focus on the brand. So for us, it's a lot about flexibility and being output based and being able to communicate our style of work, like really trusting and not micromanaging. I think that that's common in across Deel and probably every one of the areas. But
Yeah.
just really focusing on the quality of people and enjoying who you work with and giving them the freedom to figure out their work life balance. So for us that message really attracted the people that we wanted to attract.
Yeah.
There's also the message of like deal speed, which is real. We for the first year that was all we spoke about was deal speed. So if you're a person that was looking to get over bureaucracy and into more of a doing moving situation, then that would have been attractive to you. But what have you seen is a good message that companies put out there?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of message, I think they're more transparent about the culture and salaries, right? That's been a big push,
Mm,
is having people really highlight what the pay rate is. There's been a big push
yeah.
for kind of global leveraging on compensation. So that's something we're seeing. Also, really, there's been the big push on DEI. So you'll see a lot of messaging, company brand, and even job boards, right? If you look at some of the job posts now, companies that are very focused on building like a DEI recruitment strategy, they're actually getting away from kind of that bullet point model, right? Because there were studies shown. I think I went to a seminar, and Text Recruit was showing this, and they were talking about the more bullet points itemized is actually shown that female candidates would tend to not apply, but when it's written in free form format, that actually helped to kind of attract more talent that might not feel that they are qualified enough for the role, right? So the way you write the job description and then adding kind of those equal opportunity employer things, I think we're seeing a lot more of those because companies are becoming very mindful of what's
Yeah.
important to candidates right now, and that's company culture and that's flexible work schedule and then salary. So those are the big three things right now that a lot of candidates are really looking for when they're going to search for jobs. And so you're starting to see a lot of companies who have good strategies in place actually adapt to that.
Yeah. I'm glad to know that everyone's kind of getting on board with that. The salary piece is super important.
Yeah, salary transparency has become another one, right? I mean, on Arc, we try and like have everybody advertise for what the role pays up front because a lot of candidates still
Saves
are
time.
not sure. Yeah, a lot. Yeah, it saves a lot of time, and then a lot of candidates are very uneasy about when to ask for that in the interview process, right? Or if this comes up, what's the best time for me as a candidate to ask this company, or what's the best time for the employer to ask what are you looking for, right? We want to make sure that they can do the job, but we don't want to qualify them out immediately just on salary. Right? So you're starting to see a lot more upfront salary transparency, but they'll put things like open to negotiation at the end. So I think that's
Oh, that's
something
cool.
trend as well. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Okay. Well, let's kind of switch gears here. I want to talk a little bit more, whether there is an upcoming recession or not. I think there's a lot of discussion on what's happening, but
Mhm.
building a strategy, a recession-proof hiring strategy. Let's talk about that. So, I want to talk a little bit about how companies can prepare for unexpected economic downturns like the one we've seen kind of the last 7, 8 months.
Yeah.
Um, how they're going to develop that, like having a contingency plan in place for hiring, specifically around remote hiring. Anything you've seen
Yes.
on that? Any strategy, any input?
I think that's a very interesting balance because there is a balance between wanting to hire the right people and not underpay because like you said salary is important when people are looking for a job, so you don't if you want the right person you need to pay them what they want to be paid or need to be paid in order for you to have them. So there is a balance between finding the right people and people really build the product, and on the other side being mindfully frugal, but there's a fine line between that, right? You need to find the right balance. So there is mindful frugality. There is a balance between being cost efficient and looking at markets that are more cost effective for your company, but
Right.
also offering good salaries, good benefits, and still not inflating your teams. So if you're hiring the right people, then maybe you can pace out your hiring strategy so that you can ramp when the market gets there and not have to it so much now that the market is kind of fluctuating down. We did see a lot of terminations. Of course, I think terminations increased from what we saw in 2022, like 107%, which
Hmm.
is huge. And that was on the global level. But we did see an increase in global hiring. So companies seem to be shifting towards that strategy of looking outside of what they usually thought was the norm.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's two parts to this that I always kind of talk about when people are asking about what's going on and why this happened. I think the economy has been great for the last 10 years, right? We've had some small recessions, but if you look at startups and specifically startups in tech, right? You've had this kind of growth at all cost mindset where things like unit economics have kind of taken a back seat. So, companies get an influx of cash. They know they need to grow fast. They quickly hire, right? And they quickly hire, they ramp up, and then the market turns and they have some extra hires there that really, um, they just don't have enough work for them, unfortunately. And that's I think it comes down to being more strategic and planning and being more mindful of the budget, right? And trying to remain profitable because a lot of companies, they'll sacrifice profitability in terms of scale, right? And you're seeing a lot of companies now really kind of spin that narrative and actually take a more, I guess, aggressive focus on staying profitable, especially early on, even when they get big funding rounds. And that's trickling into hiring. So, what we're seeing right now is that while companies still are hiring, because I think we all still believe that in order to grow, right, you either grow or you die, and hiring is part of that growing strategy. But they're being more careful with who they hire, and they're spending time looking outside of where they normally would because they want to make sure that the person they bring on is going to be with them for the long term and they're going to perform well. So we're seeing a
I
lot of
have a question for you.
Go
I have a
ahead.
question for you. So do you typically see that companies come to you with a people strategy already formed, or do they come to you and ask you, hey, Mike, can you help me understand this better? Is there a different way I can go about this? And follow up to that, do you have a preference of the two of those?
That's a good question. A lot to
It's a
unpack
long
there.
one. It's a long
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
No, so I every company is different, right? And what I always tell people is this: what I learned early on in this industry is when you're building a company, right? You have these three kind of pillars that you need to meet and be successful in order to have consistent growth, right? Product,
Hmm.
you have to have a great product people want. You have to be able to establish product market fit. And then the last one is the ability to hire and retain, scale your people. And that one's often overlooked or often viewed as this is the easiest part, right? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But what you'll see in terms of a hiring trend and the growth of the business, and this is not specific to any one business, I say on average, this is typically what we see is that 0 to 20 is kind of built through friends and family, right? You got a couple buddies you went to UC Berkeley Engineering School with, right? You reach out, hey, I'm forming a company, want to get on board, great. And then you have some luck through your VC partnerships, your job posts. Once you reach kind of that pre-seed, maybe seed funded 50 employee company count, that's really where you see kind of a leader of talent come in, right? Like head of talent acquisition, or at least somebody an experienced recruiter.
Hmm.
And then as you kind of grow and you get to that Series B round, you'll actually have kind of those talent teams formed. And that's really where
Hmm.
you get strategy, because at that B round, that's a large influx of cash. And a lot of times companies will try and just grow their A round through one or two talent individuals. But once you get to that B round stage, you're going to have something like a head of talent, maybe two technical recruiters, a couple sourcers, an HR business partner, things like that, right? And that's really where we see companies who have a strategy, who have, all right, I know every quarter how many roles we're going to hire for the remainder of 2022, 2023. But a lot of times, those earlier stage companies, they're figuring out as they go, right? One of my old employers, LinkedIn, Reed Hoffman, he said, startup is like falling off a cliff and building a plane on the way down, right? So that's kind of what it is. And you're assembling those parts, and some of those parts involve recruiting. So you have to make sure you have those assembled correctly, for a poor
Yep.
metaphor.
No,
But
that was a really good metaphor.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for throwing me some unexpected questions there. I always like
Sorry.
it.
I knew you could take it though. I knew you could take it.
No, that was great. So let's talk a little bit about best practices for, I guess, sourcing and attracting remote talent, right? So what do you think are some practical ways for, oh, wait, we already asked this question. So,
I was like,
let's switch gears here a little bit. I guess when we talk about building the workforce, right? Talking about
mhm.
that, this is probably a really good question for you, right? How can companies navigate potential legal and logistical barriers when hiring remote workers from different countries, right? You mentioned earlier the tax situation in Brazil. Um, can you expand a little bit on just, what some of the logistical legal barriers can be when building this remote hiring strategy?
Yeah, so the answer is endless, like a rabbit hole of legal issues. So my personal advice is don't do it yourselves because you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out something that other people have figured out and spent a lot of time figuring it out. Um, Local labor laws change all the time, and you have to be compliant with local labor laws if you don't want to get into any kind of issue. So you
Mhm.
really, really need to focus on being compliant and solid from the start, just like you said, so that you don't come tumbling down, right? You need to make sure that the people you hire are the right people and that the way you hire them is the right way. So in terms of local labor laws and setup structure, really, for example,
Mhm.
in Colombia, in Mexico, I remember I started working, and in Mexico, like the laws changed like 3 months after I started working, and I had to relearn everything I had learned because everything was entirely different. Or UK with Brexit. Once there was Brexit,
Right.
the laws changed, right? So you need to figure out how does it work now? Or countries, for example, that are establishing laws now around um, mandatory allowance of working from home and things
Yeah.
like that. So, as an employer, it's very hard to really stay at the top of all of these questions and all of these legal issues. Or, for
Mhm.
example, in Colombia, if you want to establish an entity, you have to first have a bank account, and to get a bank account, you have to wait 6 months. So, in short, to answer your question, how to go about it, just make sure you have reliable partners that are market experts in every one of the markets that you want to enter, and try to streamline so that you don't have to figure it out every time with every new country that you're trying to enter. So make it as easy as possible for you to be able to say, I want that person, let's go for them and let's onboard them tomorrow.
Awesome.
I hope
Oh,
that
that was
answers.
I don't even have anything to add. That was great. So we'll
Okay.
switch. Um, tell me a little bit more about like some specific ways, I guess, global remote hiring can help companies build a more flexible and agile workforce.
I'm sorry, I missed you there. What did you say?
So, how can remote hiring, I guess, help companies build a more flexible and agile workforce?
Yes. So I think that a way to build a more flexible and agile workforce is by hiring. Well, if you hire outside of your territory, you're making it flexible and agile by default because you're covering different time zones, you're covering different cultures, you're covering different market expertise. So that makes it flexible and agile to start. I
Hmm.
think that really being in tune with what your talent wants and being able to give that to them makes it flexible. There's actually a cool company that I was working with a while ago. They're called Flexa, and they actually give you a questionnaire for your company to fill out, and they rate you how flexible you are. And they give you tips on what you can do to become more flexible and more appealing to your talent. But I think that if you're hiring global talent, it's ingrained in you. You don't really have to think about it. You're automatically it.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you a little bit about like what I've seen the value from, right? Is my last company where I was in office. Everybody was in at 9 a.m. Pacific and everybody left at 6 p.m. Pacific. And the business shut down, right? There was no
Yeah.
operations. Here at Arc, right, we have a global team, and the business kind of never stops, right? We have reps in Taiwan, we have reps all throughout the Americas, we have reps in Europe. So we have coverage kind of all over, and it's allowed us to expand our reach on both candidate and client side. So it makes us more agile, and I guess that's really the benefit of remote work for me as a sales leader, right? Selling in the HR space. We're able to penetrate markets that a lot of companies wait until very late in their growth to actually target, because we developed such a global distributed workforce, and we have, like you mentioned, those local market experts that can actually go out there. So Yeah, I hear you on that. So
Agree.
we got time. We got a quick question coming up, and then we'll jump in and kind of finish up. So this question's from Elizabeth, asking for you. I'm currently working as a technical project manager, and I obtained a certificate in coding full stack MERN from MIT. I hear it's a good school. Is there a career that combines both, or should I focus on the search of a career of each one and combine two careers remotely?
That's a really good question. Um, It's a very good question. And what I can say, I'll answer on two different levels. So, from a technical level, the answer is you can now do both, which you formerly couldn't. So, before it used to be you need to choose a career, you need to stick to it, you're a full time employee, that's it. But now we're seeing a trend in which the best talent actually wants to be contractors, even if it's full time contractors, because that gives them the ability to work with multiple companies at the same time. So, the answer to you is on the second level is I think you should do what your heart desires and you should go where you're happy. So go find a team that you're happy to work with, go find a product that you're excited to build and something that really lights you up and you can test both of them. So the answer is you're no longer limited to one career specifically. You can test the waters and see what works for you and figure it out like that. But definitely don't stay somewhere where you're not happy. That would be my advice.
It's good advice. Always
Yeah,
good advice.
I agree.
We got one more here, and then I want to shift gears into kind of a hiring strategy. But this one's from Lawrence asking. It's actually an interesting question. What we talked about a few minutes ago, right? How do we create an environment when you're working remote? How do you create an environment where people feel safe being transparent and over communicating in public channels? So I guess um, I'm not quite sure what they mean by safe, but I'm guessing, being able to express your mind, speak freely, talk about the company vision and goals, right? If everything takes place in a public channel, how do you establish that culture? Any tips on that or?
I think that a, a company follows example. So when the C-suite and when management feels comfortable to have discussions and are transparent, then you start to pick up on the lingo. So for example, we saw a lot of people contradicting each other on C-suite in Slack at the beginning, but not in an offensive way, in an open discussion conversation way. Like, no, you have to do this. No, you didn't do that. No, but I did this. Okay, great. So you see the ping pong and that really enables you to do the same and to put ideas out there. Also, encouraging your talent to participate and to bring up feedback. For example,
Yeah,
if your sales team is seeing something that's lacking in the product and the product never finds out, your product is always going to stay lacking. So you have to figure out how sales needs to communicate with product. Now, if we're talking more about manager stuff and then that's just as sensitive as it would be in an office. I don't know what you're seeing, Mike, but I think that manager and managee roles are you need to get a feel of the person, and obviously you're not going to go to your manager publicly and be like, "I'm unhappy with the way you spoke to me," because I don't think that's smart. But everything
no,
else you should be able to say.
yeah, I've tried that before. It did not go
You
well. So
have? How'd it
no,
go?
I'm
Okay,
joking.
that's brave.
No, but I think that brings up a lot of good points. I think, we're talking about hiring and employee retention. I think really with onboarding, that's something core that you want to establish too, right? When you bring that employee on, you kind of want to let them know about how to best communicate. For us, using this example, we have a lot of different specific channels in Slack, like product feedback channel, like you mentioned, right? Market and sales collaboration, right? The executive suite, all in the general, a whole company, right? So having those channels built out, having those channels kind of clearly state a purpose as to where that's communicated, and then really establishing upfront and having those written and accessible about what your company's values are and what your company's, I guess, communication and even feedback style
Yeah,
is. We do a good job of that. And then
yeah,
even my team and the sales team, I've made a whole separate one, and they don't often like this, but every sales team meeting, I make them read the sales team charter because it holds us to a set of standards, and that's kind of what we base our team on. And then part of that is talking about we always celebrate each other's wins, console each other's losses, right? We welcome all feedback. We're honest and transparent. So setting that tone and making like those kind of environments, I think can help, to answer that
I think
question.
I'd like to be in your team, Mike. I think I would enjoy that.
No,
But I
gotta
think, but
gotta
you're,
hit quota. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I do that too. I do that too. But yeah. So I think you said something that's super interesting, which is values. I think as long as the company values are aligned with what you're
Mhm.
trying to create, then it's easy to catch along. So I second that.
All right, all about values. Great. All right. Well, let me figure out where we left off here. I want to keep this going. We got what a little bit less than 25 minutes here. So let's talk a little bit more about how we can make global hiring work for you and your company. So, um, do we have any examples, I guess, of remote hiring strategies that will align? I mean, you're talking about this, right? Values. So this is a
Hmm.
perfect segue into this question. Um, any examples of remote hiring strategies that align with the company values, and how do they differ from ones that don't? Right. So we're talking about companies' values that we just talked about. How do you build that into your hiring strategy, especially when going after remote employees?
I feel like I have to flip this one to you. This question is yours.
Okay. Um, I think I'd go back to kind of what we said earlier, right? Values kind of translate into soft skills a little bit, right? I think usually the people that align with the type of soft skills that we're looking for usually tend to have similar values, but it all starts in the interview process and the identification of the right talent profile. So
Hmm.
really being aligned with your recruiter and your talent teams, as well as any hiring managers involved, as well as everybody on your team, right? I think oftentimes this goes awry when me as the manager says, "Here's who I want to hire," and I don't welcome any input from the team, right? And then we go back and we say that our values are very collaborative and we welcome all ideas, right? So, uh,
Hmm.
really asking the team, like, who do we feel is our next hire, right? We have to bring somebody in. What are we lacking, right? What do we want this person to kind of come in, right? But at the same time, we need them to align for value. So right now, what you can do is start kind of crafting that ideal profile for who you want to hire, and then you kind of code that in to your interview process, right? You have everybody know exactly what questions to ask, right? Every question you want to ask should be kind of geared towards some soft skills or value assessment, right? Know what answers you want to hear, know how to score it, build out a scoring rubric, right? If they respond with just this, that's a one. If they add this, that's a two, and score
Hmm.
every candidate. And I think that can really help build a scalable strategy that can still help you align on bringing in the right type of people that are aligned with the values that you have as a company.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Agree. And I also think that it matters what stage you're hiring for. So if you're hiring at the beginning of a company, you want people that are more agile, more okay with chaos, more okay with running, breaking, falling and playing while they're falling, like you said. But you want people that are able to do that. But as you evolve, you also want people that have done it already. So I think that the profile of the people that you're hiring also evolves as the company evolves.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're very correct in that the people that you want in your pre-seed company are probably not the people that you want when you're at a Series D stage, right? Now, I'm not saying
Hmm.
get rid of them, but the hiring profile is going to change, right? So the people you look for to supplement the team to bring on as you grow, you're going to be looking for people with different backgrounds and experience, which is actually something we'll jump into here in a second. So talking about that, I guess on this subject of hiring, right? How can companies balance the need for, say, technical skills, right, with other important factors like such as culture fit, communication style? What else? I mean, I think I wanted to talk about this question, but I feel like we kind of just answered this, right? It's all about how to codify and really understand exactly who you're looking for. But I'd love to hear if you have anything else to add on
No, I would pick up the phone and say, Mike, what should I do?
that. All
That's what
right,
I would do. I'd be
awesome.
like, Mike, I need to find the person. Once I find them, I know what to do with them, but help me out. So that's what I would do. Um, but yeah, I think that one thing that we see a lot and we hear a lot, especially as we grow as a company, and as I mentioned before, we've had very quick growth, um, is being diverse and inclusive. and
Yeah.
how to measure the success of that. So we can say, oh, we are diverse and inclusive, but really, how do you see that reflected? How can you measure that? How can you say, yes, success, we are?
Yeah.
I'm asking you.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a big question, right? So I think that varies on company to company. You kind of want to understand right now. I'm not a DEI expert by any means, right? So, but I think you want to understand what does really diversity mean to you, right? And why do you want to build a diverse team, right? Because
Hmm.
I'll be transparent. I've talked to companies before that come in because that's what everybody else is doing, right? That's not a good way to build a strategy. Asking only for something like, I want a team of female engineers to show that we're diverse, right? That's also not really a good strategy to build a diverse team. You want to look at what is this, what is the value add of bringing on people from different experiences, different backgrounds, right? Different racial ethnic groups, LGBTQ community members, right? People with disabilities, veterans. What is the benefit of adding that? And I think when you want to build out that DEI strategy, you really have to understand fully what diversity is, because
Hmm.
otherwise it's going to spend your time looking for females, and you're going to ask your agency partners to do, which it's a gray area in terms of legality and all that stuff. So you always have to be careful. But I think the best thing is to not rely on what you've been doing, right? When it comes to building out like a DEI strategy, you want to really kind of expand outside of your local reach, get away from just relying on LinkedIn outreach, right? Go to sites like Arc, where we can connect you to talent all over the world who's coming from different backgrounds. And then also kind of take more of a blind approach to your recruitment strategy. Something we do on Arc is we have a feature where we can actually remove the first name in the picture from candidates, so that when you first see them, you don't know if it's a female, male, you don't know really based on anything on their picture or their name. And you just have to hire based on the technical assessments. There's a lot of great tools out there that can actually help you build that into your sourcing strategy. But I think, it's great to build diverse teams, but you really want to understand why you're doing it and what the value out of that is. And that will actually help craft your strategy more. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I have a question. I think we've established that there's huge benefit to
Mhm.
expanding your scope and looking into other countries and other regions. And actually, funnily enough, in that report that I mentioned before, we found that APAC is actually hiring outside of APAC most aggressively, and LATAM is the region where everyone is looking for talent at. So we are seeing tendencies across the globe, and we have described all these different benefits of it. So being diverse, being inclusive, being agile, being able to enter markets, like being able to be cost effective and wave the storm, or wave the storm. Is that how you say it in English? Wave the storm. Is that
Weather
how you
is
say it?
going. Yeah. Yeah.
Weather the storm.
Weather
Thank
is going.
you. Okay. And like weather the storm. I was there. I was almost there. So we've spoken about all of these different benefits. Um, but do you feel, because I find that a lot of companies that we talk to, and we started really with SMB companies when we started out, and now we're working with enterprise companies, but the
Yeah.
education piece is super important. We find that a lot of companies aren't aware of how easy it is to access talent globally, and so
Mhm.
they don't even ask the question. It's like they're scared to ask, can I even look at talent in Brazil, because no, it's too complicated, how am I going to do that? So
Right.
how do you address that in your scope of work, and what do you recommend again, like, to them?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question, right? I think a lot of it comes down to training my team, right? Our go to market team on being able to educate them. And really, what we're seeing right on trends, talked about this, is the big shift post pandemic into global kind of recruiting and remote work, right? Everybody's remote. Um, but I think, like you said, a lot of recruitment teams, even C level, even hiring managers, right? To them, remote means, hey, we're all still here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but we don't have to go into the office, right? That's remote. And I think when you really view, um, when you talk about the educational piece of understanding their real challenges when it comes to hiring, right? And I think it just goes down to really kind of talking about their strategy and what their challenges have been. Uncovering, hey, is your average time to hire north of 60 days for an engineering role? Why is that?
Hmm.
Right? talking about how much you spent on recruiting efforts over the last couple of years, right? And then really helping them kind of see the value of what we can do in terms of bringing this new strategy into place by increasing your reach to talent, increasing your ability to spend less on your recruitment efforts and on the salaries, and still
Mm-hmm.
not have to sacrifice the candidate quality, and then leveraging partnerships like we have with Deel to help them get set up and how easy it is. I think all that kind of comes into play. It's just an education piece because there's a lot of companies out there that think they are remote. They think they have a remote hiring strategy in place, but all they're doing is advertising the role in remote on the same job boards they've used, doing the same outreach to the same group of candidates, and you're not going to build a global team that way. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think it's, just like anything else, you have to stay kind of educated in what's going on and really kind of understand how to expand the vision of those who might be new to this, right? Asking the right questions and uncovering those different levels of pain and making sure that they're aware that this can be a really big piece of their strategy to help solve some of those.
Agreed.
All right. Well, we got about 8 or so minutes left. Quick shout out. I got one more question from the audience here. It's from Pablo. Good question. So, how do you encourage remote tech talent to commit to your brand or your company for the long term? That's a good one. So this kind of focuses more around, I guess, retention in terms of remote employees.
Yeah. So in terms of retention, emphasizing what we preach, which is we want to give people happy lives, not just, we want people to be happy in what they do. So I think that if a company is flexible enough to allow for what people are looking for, then people are going to be less inclined to leave. And it kind of is a hybrid of the things that I was saying and the things that you were saying. So flexibility, salaries, good vibes in the team, communication, and hiring people that are culturally compatible in terms of being all aligned with the values of the company. I think that those 5 things together make it for retention. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, there's a lot, right? I think, as a manager myself, right? I think one of the biggest struggles for me is kind of just being able to have that level of trust in the team, right? I've been a sales manager for last 8 years, and they've always been in in-office roles where you can hear people picking up the calls, right? The team's working. So I think really establishing that kind of upfront as to who you want to hire, right? So knowing exactly, again, being aligned to those core values, making sure you bring on the right types of people so that you have that level of trust while they're working remote. You have confidence in who you've hired, confidence in the team, but the engagement piece is key, right? It's not always easy. You don't always see people, right? When you're in the office, you can see somebody maybe is having a hard day, right? Or something like that. So I think it goes along with just having that mindfulness as a manager to kind of check in on everybody. And you have to be more proactive. And that goes down to our other piece about communication. But then, I think a lot of that doesn't really matter if you're remote or not. If you have, a good way to keep your employees engaged, if you're transparent, if you're doing things like sharing the product roadmap, if you're having performance reviews, if you're giving them clear paths to upward promotion, right? And setting those clear OKRs, KPIs as to what they need to do in order to grow as an employee, whether you're remote or not, if you don't have those kind of core factors in place, it doesn't matter, right? I think it always starts with hiring to me, right? Is do you bring on the right people, and are you able to onboard them and keep them engaged? But then are you doing enough to make sure that they want to stay here? It's not just about that. So I think it's all those kind of pieces combined.
Yeah. So Pablo, to sum it up, we're talking about salaries, we're talking about flexibility, we're talking about direct like a track, so how to get up, and communication, right? Those are the things we said.
Yep.
Those are all important things. I'm saying them for myself. I'm taking note. I'm like, can we hit these? Great.
Yeah, I think the path for upward promotion is key, right? And being clear on company policies, and then listen,
Hmm.
right? I think one of the things that we do here, this is another good point, is just being able to send out surveys, anonymous surveys, asking how people are, right? And then actually looking at the results and doing something about that, right? That's on
Yeah.
leadership. Is a lot of these companies do a lot of surveys and say, oh, people seem stressed out or people feel like they're not engaged with other teams, right? Uh, we'll put together a team building event, right? Cross team building event. Do that more regularly, right? Understand what's causing the stress. This is a bandwidth issue. There are things we can do to alleviate that, right? Actually taking
Maybe
action.
bring your people together from time to time,
Yeah.
have everyone meet in person once
That is a
every
big
so often.
thing. That's something at Arc that we ran into a challenge. And not to over promote my company here, but this is one of the things I really enjoy is that I started at this company the day the pandemic started, like all the lockdowns happened. That was my first day. And there was
Wow,
plans for me to go to
lucky.
Taiwan like in the first 3 months, meet the office. Still haven't been, but I've been with the company 3 years, and what I tell people that I interview, right, and they ask me like, what brought me to ARC and why do I stay? Is I say like, I've never met anyone in person, but I feel like I know everybody here very well, and I think that's a great example of how a company can do remote recruiting and actually keep a remote team in place, right? When you have employees saying things like that, and that comes down to over communication and engagement and things like that. Yeah. So,
Agree.
Pablo, that was a very long answer to your question, but hopefully that gave you some more insight there. So, anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, we can go ahead and start wrapping up. Give you a few moments here to open up the Q&A session. Nothing else? I don't think so. All right. Well, if one more question comes up, we'll have some time. But other than that, this was actually a very fun session. I enjoyed chatting with you as always, Bianca. So thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you.
the time. I think we got a lot of good advice here. And yeah, we'll send out a recording here. But let's see. I think that's it. Do we have any more questions? No. All right.
Should we end with like some predictions, maybe?
Some predictions. All right.
But this is playing with the, I don't know, with fire, because then they don't happen. It's like, what happened? But we
Yeah.
actually think
Let's do
that
it.
based on what we're seeing, we do see that there's going to be an increase in global hiring still, and perhaps the countries in which people are hiring out of the most are not necessarily going to be the same in a year from now. Right now, we're seeing that the US, Philippines, Argentina, UK, and India are in very high demand.
Right.
And we're seeing salaries in LATAM actually decrease in some countries and increase in other countries. But overall, um, salaries in developing countries are about 28% higher when they're being hired by companies outside of those countries, which is
Yeah.
nice to know. So that's also bettering their life quality in those countries. So we do see that companies are going to stop hiring in HQ countries and start hiring more global. We
Mhm.
also think developing countries are going to continue to increase, except Mexico. Mexico has gone down, but they're also doing pretty well in terms of growth overall.
Yeah.
Um, and we also saw, which was really interesting, we saw that crypto payments went down by like 1%, but they're still up there, which is really interesting. And stable coins are very much in demand. So USD is very much the preferred payment method for most workers around the globe. So those are our predictions slash insights, if that's helpful.
I like that. I like that. Well, let's see. What do I think? I think, for me, what I felt in terms of the hiring kind of cinch, and a lot of companies that are going on hiring freezes or unfortunately doing reduction in force. I feel like this happened probably around May or June of 2022. And if you look at
Mm.
most recessions, they last typically 10 months. So we're at kind of the tail end. And I think there's going to be learnings that we talked about, right? Companies are going to be paying more attention to their unit economics to maintaining a level of profitability while they scale. And I think remote recruiting is going to be a big part of that because they're going to have to really analyze cost in terms of acquiring talent. So I think in the next couple months, you're going to see a big increase in demand for tech talent in some of the countries that you mentioned, and some that we might not even really have predicted yet. But I think companies are really going to start to adapt this as part of their strategy, as they're kind of dusting off, I guess, the the results of some of the things that came crashing down around them. They're trying to rebuild, but with a new mindset. So that's what I would say is my prediction for the next couple months is we're going to see a lot more focus on kind of bottom line and increase in profitability, not just growth and scalability at all costs. Because I think we're kind of seeing the tail end of some of those unfortunate situations. So
Love that. I hope you're right.
I hope so too. Right? So thank you so much for joining. I think Gina's put some of the information in the chat. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Check out our websites, Deel, Arc. But thank you, everybody. And thank you especially to Bianca. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Let
me.
everybody go.
Appreciate it.
Right.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
All right.
Have a good
Have a
night.
good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.